historically and present day, and like issues revolving around that. And why I chose to have that as my major is because I felt like a really big divide in terms of the community I was coming from, and like being here at Wellesley at like this elite small liberal arts college. Like my parents are Chinese immigrants. Like they came here when they were young, like a bunch of other immigrants, and what a lot of times that we study in higher ed, it's something that like can't translate directly back. Like you can't tell them about the readings that you did, and things like that. And having such a major was more humanizing in terms of relating like my connection from higher ed to the community where I'm from.
During my first week here at Wellesley, during orientation week, a bunch of students, we gathered together downstairs at Lulu, and we were asking one another, why did you choose Wellesley? And when it was my turn to answer the question, one of my peers cut me off and said affirmative action. And you could tell that everyone else was surprised and maybe disgusted by her statement, but I sort of shrugged it off because I'm used to things of that nature being said to me.
So growing up in a very small community that was predominantly white, I think one of the big differences was that a lot of kids hadn't had exposure to different types of people. And so I remember one time when I was 5, I was playing on the playground with one of my friends who was white, and he came up to me and asked me why I was so dark and if I'd spend a lot of time in the sun. And I just remember thinking, like, what made you kind of think that? Like, because I'd always been that way, and I never thought it was odd because people in my family are relatively darker. So, yeah, I think things like that kind of shaped the way that they thought. And I mean, not having exposure to anyone who was black or anyone who was Hispanic or anyone who was any other race basically made it really difficult for them to see, like, yes, as a child, there are people of other colors and other ethnicities.
So for me, I had a little bit of a different upbringing and a little bit of a different familial background. So I was adopted from China when I was 6 months old, and I was raised in a white family in New York. So growing up, I would frequently be told by a multitude of people that I would be acting white, or I displayed white mannerisms, and in terms of what I wrote for I2M Wellesley, I have heard on multiple occasions that people say to me that I am basically white.
Given my situation, and given that pretty much everyone in my school was white, I had a pretty good experience growing up compared to some other people. I think most people were pretty accepting and understood that I was just a little bit different, but didn't really take it very much into consideration when they decided to be my friend or something like that.
So sometimes I've heard, what are you? Or I love your mix, oh my gosh, I want that mix. And I think people don't understand that it's not easy being mixed race. For those of us who are mixed race, and in no way can I speak for all of us, but for me and for several of my mixed race friends at Wellesley, it's difficult. Sometimes we feel like we're the outsider within, like we're relegated to the peripheries of a marginalized community, sort of like we're on the fringes. We don't always feel comfortable in certain spaces, and more often than not, we feel like it's a balancing act between cultures, between our backgrounds.
So, like, last semester, I was in a class called Education, Immigration, and Social Mobility, and the entire topic was on immigration, and, like, the power of education and, like, the complexities with, like, the education system and how that relates to immigration. And for my final project, we had to do a portraiture of someone who was related to immigration, and I chose to do my mother. So I, like, for the first time ever, I had the chance to bring her into my classes in terms of, like, having her voice heard, and I, like, conducted an interview with her, and then I ended up writing, like, 20 pages about her immigration story here to America, her experiences in the education system, and how, like, my generation of my sister and I are related to her. And it was really cool because that's not something that's in academia, there's not always a space to have such stories like that heard. And it's really a lot of like faculty, especially faculty of color here, who allow students to bring those voices in. And having ethnic studies major allowed was a way for me to not only incorporate like my own experiences and where like my family's coming from, but also see the connections between that and other students on campus, other experiences I've heard.
When I was in high school, I think about my 10th grade year, a lot of my friends started getting on this whole natural movement. So it's just like being comfortable not only in your own skin, but with your natural hair. And for me, it was a really big step for me to be able to get to that place, not only because of the fact, and I didn't even realize it at that point, but this subliminal doctrine that society had given me over so many years with the idea that my hair was supposed to be straight. And it took a lot of convincing and a very long transition period before I was able to like actually feel very comfortable with the fact that I was growing my hair out.
It's obviously a stereotyping issue in regards to people being uncomfortable about how I'm acting because it doesn't fit into this stereotypical like Asian woman that they have in their mind, and that people just kind of seem to have me identify as a white person for them.
Okay, so WAM Slam is the Wellesley Academic Action Movement, Siblings Leading Action for Multiculturalism. This is part 2 because in 2001, a lot of students also gathered together to fight for things that the college was lacking, such as having Asian American studies, having full-time advisors, an advisor to students of Asian descent, amongst other things that were lacking, like the multicultural space, and just a commitment to having more diverse faculty and a more inclusive curriculum. And since that in 2001, and not all the demands have been met, because when history doesn't change, it repeats itself until it does change. And like at this point, we are pushing again for that change. And so what it is it's students coming together to fight for ethnic studies on this campus, inclusive of a Latino studies minor, and having multicultural space, because right now, the students of color on this campus have one room in a building, and it's a really ugly room, and we all have to share it, and we have to reserve it before we even go there, and that's physically not a space, but it's also, it doesn't bring like a cultural communal space into having like just a comfortable place where we can relax. What it is also a place for students who often feel like they don't have their voices heard on campus and who feel like they are largely disconnected from the typical image of what a Wellesley community is and what a typical Wellesley student should be doing. If they feel disconnected from that, like this is a space where people can come together, and I've heard from some people that it gives like a lot of meaning to their experience at Wellesley in terms of fighting for something bigger than themselves, like more than just their academics.
If I had $1 for every time some white boy told me I was exotic or spicy or curry or cafe au lait, I think I'd have a lot of money, and that's still in just like $1 bills. It was over the summer, and we were talking about going to the beach and hanging out, and I was like, yeah, I really want to get like darker, I want to get tanner, and he was like, you don't need to, like, you're perfect just the way you are, and I was like, yeah, but like I like being tanner, and he was just like, no, you should stay just that color. You're really pretty for a brown girl. I think that when talking about it with my friends later, I realized just like how uncomfortable and like weird and like messed up that was, but at the moment I just kind of like awkwardly laughed and was like, okay. I think there's a lot of things that we're trained to just deflect, and we're told to not make a scene and just move on from certain things, and I'm definitely trying to learn to actually talk to people about how they're saying is problematic, but at the moment I was just like, okay, next conversation topic.
The first time my mom permed my hair was when I was 6. And for me, that was sending a message that my hair was too much. It was too difficult, too coarse, too nappy, too tangled for anyone to try to deal with, and that I was offending people with the state of my natural hair. And I'd had perms all my life until that point, until actually there were different periods in which my hair was falling out, and I was a kid. So that's a really weird thing for you to, like, not even realize that, like, I watched my mom freak out over, like, pulling the comb through my hair and realizing that it was coming out in, like, pretty reasonable clumps. And it's just that whole idea with the focus on the frustration that there was something wrong there. Like, my hair was always a problem. Black hair is always a problem.
When I was in 5th grade, I was taking French for the first time. It was my first foreign language. And, you know, we're like 10, 11, I don't even know. And we're learning different describers, like, I am a girl, I am a boy, I have short hair, whatever. And we were taught to say, I am American. For context, this was in Cambridge, so like one of the most like liberal places in America. And my French teacher looks at me and goes, "You're not American." And I like didn't really think anything of it. I was 10. I came home that day and my dad asked me what I'd learned at school, and I told him that my French teacher said that I wasn't American. To this day, I have never seen my father flip a shit quite like that day. Only now do I realize how incredibly rude that is. Rude, racist, like just so out of place. And once again, if you're 10 years old and you're being confronted by a teacher about this, and you're the only person who looks like you do, when your teacher is white, your class is white, you are younger than everyone else, and you have not been taught yet to understand that you are different and different in a bad way, it makes it really difficult to stand up for yourself.
Growing up in a white community, most people I knew didn't really have much cultural background or much ethnic background, or didn't have much exposure to any kind of ethnic diversity, which really meant that I was the only exposure they had, which was a little bit of pressure, but it was also sometimes I found it was difficult to fit in, or in some situations it would be just really hard to relate on some different levels, just some of the ways my parents acted, or the way my family was, and the ways theirs were.
Well, I went to a science and technology, math, whatever, based high school, and we did research projects every year, which was a really big thing for us, in which we would spend the entire year working on these projects in the lab, or research, doing actual tangible literary research, or whatever that project would entail. And it would all lead up to these really big competitions and symposiums and a variety of opportunities. One of my black classmates, had, I think, the wavy extensions in her hair. And I never thought anything of this, or that there was anything wrong with it. There isn't anything wrong with it. Our research teacher approached her a week away from one of the symposiums and asked her with the most intense severity, "So what are you going to do with your hair?" She looked back to her, confused and just completely misunderstanding, like, where she was coming from, whether or not she was saying this in jest. She repeated the question, "So what are you going to do with your hair?" The student responded, "I'm keeping it the way it is. I don't understand what your qualms are with this. Like, do you have an issue with it, like, personally?" She said, "It's unprofessional. You won't be seen as a presenter. It's unkept. You should do something with it."
So I want to start with a word, and the word is ghetto. And in my opinion, ghetto is not an adjective. It's not a way to describe people and things. It's a way to talk about a place where people may be of a similar background, maybe underprivileged,
Thus, when I first came to Wellesley, I was a part of a group of people who I thought were pretty close